Hello, everybody. This is Zach at it again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I'm honored to be here with renowned author Steve Bergsman. He has written Have Mercy, Baby, the Life of Clyde McPhatter. Thank you so much, Steve, for being here. It's an honor to talk to you today.
Well, I'm glad to see that there's another Clyde McPhatter fan out there.
Absolutely. For those who are wondering who Clyde McPhatter is, he was the founding frontman of the Drifters, and I think people will know him mostly now because of his, when they watch holiday films like Home Alone, they can hear his high tenor on the Drifters version of White Christmas, and I think that's...
I think White Christmas is the only doo-wop song that you hear today because it's a seasonal song.
Right.
So otherwise you don't hear much doo-wop anymore, but
right.
You probably somewhere you will hear White Christmas during December.
Right. But as a writer and as a researcher, I have looked and looked and looked and looked and looked all my life for stuff about Clyde McPhatter, for stuff about his life, for stuff about anybody, any of those founding rock and roll singers. What people don't understand is people like Clyde McPhatter. These people are the founders of rock and roll that nobody's heard of today. And looking for stuff on Clyde McPhatter, there's a German import of a 50-page essay that had some pictures with it, and I had to send away for that and spend way much more money than it was worth to get my hands on it, because that's the only thing there was on Clyde McPhatter until your book comes along. So I guess really the first question I want to ask you is what made you want to write this book? Was it because you're like me and you're a fan and there was nothing out there about his life?
Well, a couple of things. So I don't know how. I was a journalist for a long time, and I switched over to writing books.
Right.
I was a journalist, so my first books were about business, but I decided I didn't want to do that anymore, and I was looking for something else to do, and I just fell into writing about old rock and rollers who I thought were important, but people have entirely forgotten. So people like, for example, Screamin' Jay Hawkins.
Right, I put a spell on you.
Yeah, so I don't know how many people remembered him, but everybody knows his song, I Put a Spell on You. And, I have a Google tab that anytime anybody writes about Screamin' Jay Hawkins, I get a message. And I'll get a message from Google once a week that somebody is singing I Put a Spell on You. So Clyde McPhatter fell into that area for me. Somebody very important to the history of rock and roll, and nobody remembers him. You would have to be in your 70s almost to even have an inkling of who Clyde McPhatter was. Now, as you know, Zach, that Clyde McPhatter is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. He's in his successful solo career, and he's in for as a founding member of the Drifters. But as you, since you read my book, he could be in a third time as the lead singer of the Dominoes.
The Dominoes.
Dominoes in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And then Clyde McPhatter would get the trifecta.
Right. And it used to, because he's the first one to be inducted twice. It's anybody who now is inducted more than once, they say you're in the Clyde McPhatter Club, because he was the first person to have that distinction, as he well deserved.
The first Domino's record to really be a major hit was 60-Minute Man.
Okay.
And this was about 1950.
Right.
And this was the Domino's, and with Clyde McPhatter. But he didn't sing the lead on this. Bill Brown sang the lead on this.
Right.
This wasn't a doo-wop tune. This was a very sexy blues tune, more or less. So that was a number one hit for like 13 weeks on the R&B charts.
Right.
Their second song was "Have Mercy, Baby."
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the revolutionary song, I thought, because this was rock and roll before rock and roll.
Exactly.
This is about as close as you can get to rock and roll, and it not be rock and roll yet, because it was too early.
Right.
So plus, if you read the book, you know there was sort of a tragic arc to his life, and I thought "Have Mercy, Baby" sort of summed that up as well.
Yeah, because he's looking for some mercy all along in his career. You know, there was a quote, and I'm sure it was in your book that I read, but it said, you know, where Clyde was saying, I could hear my voice on the radio, and they would say, this is a hit song, but I wouldn't have enough money to buy Coca-Cola, and that's because all black artists, and Clyde McPhatter was no exception, were not getting any royalties at all, and if they were getting the bare minimum for the money that these record executives were making hand over fist in these amazing records. Do you remember the birth of rock and roll?
So I was born in 1949.
Okay.
When I was early, in my early years, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Mm-hmm.
When my parents would go out of town, my sister would go to one cousin, and I would go to my other cousins. Now, my other cousins that I spent time with were teenagers. I was only 5, 6, 7, but they were young teenagers, and they listened to all this rhythm and blues that was on the radio. They were a big fan of Bill Haley and the Com. And my sister was 3 years older than me, so when she started listening, then, you know, of course I was listening too. So I remember some of these old songs, even though I was just, you know, in my early elementary school years.
Right.
I, in fact, grew up with rock and roll.
There would have to be no more exciting time in music history than during the birth of rock and roll. Just this pandemonium of this new genre coming out, this sound that nobody had ever heard before. And Clyde McPhatter was at the helm of that, and everybody was going nuts. Now, there is something that I thought was very interesting in the book that you talk about. There was a show in Cleveland in June of 1956 where, by applause, the audience was asked to crown the king of rock and roll, and apparently Clyde had a slight edge on Elvis. Those who were there originally say that Clyde should have been the winner, and I agree.
So it's interesting with Elvis. So Elvis grew up in Memphis.
Right.
And Memphis, in the late 40s and by the early 50s, was an R&B town. And he could hear that because Memphis had an R&B station from early in the 1950s. So he knew R&B. And when he first began to cut records, before he went to the big label, when he was at Sun Records, the records he cut were older R&B songs. So he was very familiar with R&B. He would have known Clyde McPhatter well. Now, the thing about Clyde McPhatter in the early 1950s, so R&B, there was a whole genre of R&B called doo-wop, which was a group sound, and you might say at the start minimal instrumentation, though it got more complex as doo-wop went on. Clyde McPhatter had a very distinctive tenor voice, and that tenor voice was the most copied, you might say, sound in the early 1950s, because if you had a doo-wop group, you needed to have a Clyde McPhatter tenor in your group. So he was that important. That sound, that tenor in his in the doo-wop songs that he sang were the most copied during the early 1950s.
I also the big revelation in the book, and how I didn't know about her, I don't know. But in what little bit I've read on Clyde McPhatter, there is no mention of his daughter Deborah anywhere. Tell me why I didn't know about Deborah, first of all.
Okay, so Clyde was married 3 times.
Right.
Now, since you read the book, you know there's a question of Clyde's sexuality.
Right.
And although he married 3 times, he wasn't very involved with the women he married.
Right.
And basically married them, got them a big house, and then went on the road, and they were lucky if they saw him in the course of a year.
Right.
So there was only one woman he cared about, and it was a woman he did not marry. Right. And her name, Lorraine Lowe, was a girlfriend, and she didn't marry him. Deborah McPhatter was sold their on Clyde with the woman he did not marry, Lorraine Lowe. So that's his only child, and you probably don't read about it, or originally didn't read about it, because it was with the one woman he didn't marry. And he stayed in touch with Lorraine Lowe throughout his life.
Right.
And after she broke up with Clyde, she married and had a family. She had a different life, but Clyde just needed her off and on through his life, and he was always in contact with her, always called her, sent her letters. He was an avid letter writer, Clyde McPhatter, and I think Lorraine Lowe really knew more about Clyde, his personality, let's say, than anybody else.
Right. Now, this is what I got from reading the book, and you can correct me anytime that you think I may be wrong in this. Clyde married 3 times. First time to Norley Thompson. Norley was somebody the family wanted him to marry, so he did. And then there was Mary Peake, who we know very little about, but she was from Greensboro, North Carolina, which is about 100 miles from my home. So just across the North Carolina border from where I live. And then there was Lena Rackley. Now, Lena Rackley seems to me to be nothing short of an opportunist, someone wanting to capitalize on Clyde McPhatter's laurels.
I wouldn't differ from anything you said.
Right. But it would seem to me, according to your book, that Lorraine Lowe was the love of his life. I don't know that it was so much reciprocal. It may have been in the beginning, but when they split, Lorraine moved on and married happily to the guy that Deborah calls Teddy, who really, as her stepfather, acted as her real father, it would seem. But it seemed like that was the one that he just never ever got over.
So again, it goes back to, let's say, Clyde's sexuality.
Okay.
So he didn't marry Lorraine Lowe.
Right.
but Lorraine was somebody he needed throughout his life. She was a base for him.
Mm-hmm.
So he married 3 times, never had children with the women he married.
Mm-hmm.
And I go through this in the book. There were 2 ways to go for gay singers. You can be out there, and there were a number of gay singers in the early 1950s who were out there, such as Little Richard.
Little Richard, right.
So there were a number of those, and they were very successful. A lot of them had #1 hits, but they were gay, and they really didn't hide it. The majority of them hid who they were, and many of those people married. The marriage didn't mean anything, so it would look like they were heterosexual. So you can't go by Clyde's marriages, his inability to do without Lorraine Lowe, and figure out who he was as a person. Now, I tried to find a conclusion to that, just who Clyde was, but I couldn't. There were as many people who said, oh, Clyde, he was gay, but there were important people in his life who said, no, Clyde's not gay. So unless somebody wakes up one day and says, I was Clyde's partner, then I couldn't say for sure who Clyde was. And, I was doing another podcast, and somebody asked me, well, if you met Clyde, what would be the question you would ask him? And my question would be just who he was.
Right.
So, as you know, Clyde spiraled slowly, but he spiraled into alcoholism and depression. So was that because he could never really tell people who Clyde McPhatter was, or was there another reason for it? So you'd have to make that judgment reading my book.
Right.
And I lay out all the arguments either way.
You certainly do. Can you tell me, this is another point I found interesting in your book, talk to me a little bit about the father-son relationship with Irvin Feld and his rivalry with Paul Anka. I found that very interesting.
That was a story that I didn't expect and I never knew.
Mm-hmm.
But Clyde, from everything that people told me who knew Clyde and his family, he didn't have a good relationship with his father. Clyde was always looking for sort of a father figure. And Irvin Feld, who was a manager of talent, and he put on the earliest rock and roll shows, sort of took Clyde in as Clyde was an important client of his management.
Mm-hmm.
Then he met, so Irvin Feld then met Paul Anka, and he sort of adopted Paul Anka and put Paul Anka on the road to fame and left behind Clyde McPhatter. So Clyde, who thought of Irvin as kind of a father figure, was again disappointed in somebody who allegedly had paternal interest in him. So he never forgave Paul Anka. It was as if Paul Anka took the affection away, Irvin Feld, his manager's affection away from Clyde, and put it on himself. So that was Clyde. So it was, also part of his personality. This whole thing that would perhaps lead him down the road towards alcoholism,
right,
and depression.
And the fact that he never had the father he should have had. His father resented him, was jealous of him, and there was clear evidence of physical abuse, verbal abuse, mental abuse on the part of his father.
I had almost finished the book. Was the two disclosures that I reveal in the book. So, as I mentioned, Clyde was always looking for sort of a father figure, and the first one was Billy Ward, who created the Dominoes.
Right.
So back in the day, if you're a big fan of rock music and any rock band from the 60s on, four guys get together in a garage and they form, who knows, Van Halen, or three guys get together in a garage and they form the Doors, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all down the line, And but that's not the way it happened in the early 1950s. Somebody would, as a manager, create a group, but they owned the rights to the group name.
Right.
And they were not only the owner of the name, they were the manager of the group, and they set the rules. So the Dominoes they were managed by Billy Ward. He owned the group, and in fact, in this sort of organization, and this was a very popular way to go back then, you, as a singer, you were just a paid employee. That's it. You were a paid employee.
Mm-hmm.
And want to get paid, you listen to whoever was managing. So Billy Ward took Clyde on, and he made Clyde pretty much the lead singer of Billy Ward and the Dominoes. And then Billy Ward lost his head, you might say, with the success of the Dominoes, and so he changed the name to Billy Ward and the Dominoes. But he wasn't a nice person, and nobody could work for him forever because he had 4,000 rules that you had to obey if you wanted to stay a part of the Dominoes.
Right.
So, Clyde went there, and Billy Ward was his first father figure, and Irvin Feld was his second father figure. And then I'm getting toward the end of the book, and first I read, I found a story about Irvin Feld where they said his wife committed suicide, Irvin Feld's wife, and the story sort of alleged that Irvin Feld's homosexuality was the reason that happened. I invite Ronald Isley of the Isley Brothers to do the forward. They knew Clyde McPhatter well.
Right.
And they, Billy Ward, he was gay. So there was something going on back there. It was a thread that wound through Clyde's life, but I can never find where the thread ended and somebody tied it into a knot. So
Right. Now, I had an interview with Leroy Joseph McPhatter in late 2020 over the telephone. Just looked him up, found his number in a regular online telephone book search, wrote him a letter, and he called me back. So we did a brief interview. I wrote the article. I sent you the article. I don't know if you were still writing the book at the time or if you'd already finished it. But
I had already finished it.
You'd already finished it at that time.
I probably have used some of it.
Well, if you did, I'm honored. But anyway, the only mention of Leroy Joseph in your book was that it's very clear that he believed himself to be able to sing like his brother, and he tried to sing for me over the phone, but it didn't come through very well, so I couldn't tell. But in your book, the only mention of him, or maybe the only mention Deborah gives, is that he paid for him to go to prep school, which he did confirm to me, and that he believed himself to be the better singer of the family and was jealous of his older brother. He that very well may have, from what little bit I talked to him, that very well may have been possible. He just projected that Clyde was his idol, and he wanted to walk like him, sing like him, talk like him, everything. But he made no mention of Deborah. He made no mention of all these things that become very clear as reputable sources when I read your book. So I guess what I want to ask you is, do you think that Mr. McPhatter was being protective in what he was saying? Was he even going to give me enough information to be a reputable source? I mean, I was 35 years old at the time, and I wanted to know about his brother that had been dead longer than I had been alive. So he didn't know me. He may not have felt free to offer information. But I was just curious as to what you thought about the reputability of what his brother shared with me.
I don't remember when you sent it to me. I read it, but so I don't remember what else was in it other than what you just told me now. So I can't make that judgment. But family members, everybody got their own point of view.
Right. Did you learn anything about this particular brother during your research?
No, because I didn't focus on him.
Okay.
If somebody would have brought it up, I would have put it in the book.
Right.
So whatever was in the book is all I had from him.
Right.
About him.
I find this very, very odd is that there was no, because he said no, Clyde didn't have any children, but it's very clear, and you can prove that Deborah McPhatter is Clyde's daughter. There's pictures with him, and I'm very glad to see that he does have children, and you have pictures of Deborah's children and her grandchildren, and it makes me happy that his legacy is still, the pieces of him are still out there, beautiful great grandchildren that he has. And what was Clyde's relationship like with Deborah? I know in the book she says we only had a father daughter relationship for like the last little bit of his life, but she did go on tour with him. There's the story about the sandals when the KKK ran them out of town, and one of my favorite factoids, he was at the Lorraine the night before Dr. King was shot, and they gave a wave to each other. Am I getting that right as well?
Yes, you did.
What was his relationship like with Deborah overall?
So Deborah was brought up by her mother and
Right.
stepfather. She grew up in a calm, sort of normal family world. Clyde McPhatter, he was a musician, and if he wasn't on the road, it was recording. He would have occasional visits with Deborah, and as years went on and he was losing work, so Deborah would see him more and more later on. Their time together was brief, but that's was just the life back then. You have to realize that the record companies, just as you said, if you had a record, and depending on your contract, the record company would get most of that money. But so the way you made money really was personal appearances. And if you were a top tier, a Frank Sinatra, say, or
Sure.
Even Bill Haley at the time, you would be getting paid very, very good money. And Clyde actually, by the end of the 1950s, he was right up there for R&B singers. He was like on the A level, and he was getting the top money. So he would do the premier venues of the old Chitlin circuit, the Apollo in New York, or the big arenas in Chicago or Washington D.C. And in those days, you stay a week, and so he was making fabulous money for a black singer in his day. So he was for a while he was at the top of the food chain.
Take care, and thank you so much for your time.
Bye bye.